Captain Sarah Chen stepped off the transport vessel onto the polished metal floor of the Catherian Empire's main recruitment station. The air tasted different here, processed through alien filtration systems that left a metallic tang on her tongue. Around her, beings from a dozen different worlds moved with purpose through the massive hangar bay. Some walked on 4 legs, others floated using anti-grav belts, and a few skittered across the ceiling on crystalline appendages. She adjusted the simple brown jacket she wore over her civilian clothes and walked toward the registration desk. The clothing felt strange after years of military gear, but Earth's government had insisted she dress down for this mission. No need to intimidate their potential new allies, they had said. Sarah almost smiled at the irony. The registration officer was a tall, blue-skinned Catherian with 4 arms and eyes that glowed soft purple in the dim station lighting. When Sarah approached, all 4 arms continued working at different tasks while the alien spoke without looking up. Name, species, and homeworld, the officer said in accented standard Galactic. Sarah Chen, human Earth. Now the Catherian looked up, all 4 arms pausing their work. The purple eyes studied her with obvious curiosity. Human? From the newly contacted world in Sector 7798? That's right. The officer's upper right arm reached for a data pad while the lower left began typing on a keyboard. Interesting. Your species made quite an impression during first contact protocols. Very enthusiastic about joining our defense forces. Sarah nodded. Enthusiastic was one way to put it. When the Catherian Empire had arrived in Earth's solar system 18 months ago, humanity had been fighting its Third World War. The aliens had expected to find a primitive civilization barely capable of spaceflight. Instead, they found a species that had weaponized everything from kitchen utensils to orbital platforms. The ceasefire had been immediate. Earth's leaders saw opportunity in the stars, and the Catherian Empire saw potential in humanity's apparent talent for warfare. It was supposed to be a perfect match. You'll need to complete standard physical and psychological evaluations, the officer continued. Fair warning, though. Most applicants from peaceful species struggle with our combat requirements. Your kind seems different, but the training program has a 92% failure rate. I'll manage, Sarah said. The Catherian's eyes brightened with what might have been amusement. Confidence, good. You'll be assigned to Training Group 7, report to Bay 15 in 2 standard hours. Next, Sarah took her assignment chip and walked deeper into the station. The corridors were wide enough for the largest alien species to move comfortably, and the walls displayed rotating advertisements for various military specializations. Elite assault teams, orbital defense corps, deep space reconnaissance, tactical support units. Each posting showed images of different alien warriors in advanced combat gear. She found her assigned quarters easily enough. The room was basic but clean, with a bed that adjusted to her human proportions and a small workspace. A data terminal provided access to the Empire's vast information networks. Sarah spent the next hour reading about Training Group 7. The group consisted of 12 recruits from 8 different species. There were 2 Xylorians, crystalline beings known for their analytical minds, 3 Velcors, massive bear-like creatures with natural armor plating, 2 Nethrons who could phase through solid matter, a single Korthak, whose species was famous for their tactical brilliance, 2 more aliens from species she didn't recognize, and apparently, 1 human. Her. The psychological profiles available for each species painted an interesting picture. The Xylorians were logical, but struggled with rapid decision-making under pressure. The Velcors were strong but tended to rely on brute force over strategy. The Nethrons were excellent scouts but avoided direct confrontation. Every species had strengths and weaknesses that made them suitable for specific roles within the Empire's military structure. Sarah wondered what the Empire expected from humans. During first contact, the Catherian observers had witnessed several major battles from a safe distance. They had seen human tactics and weapons in action, but they hadn't seen individuals fight. They didn't understand what a single human soldier could accomplish with proper motivation. They were about to learn. When the time came, Sarah made her way to Bay 15. The training area was enormous, with sections dedicated to different types of combat simulation. Zero-gravity chambers, urban warfare mock-ups, alien environment simulators, and weapons ranges stretched as far as she could see. Her fellow recruits were already assembled near the center of the bay. The Velcors towered over everyone else, their dark fur gleaming under the training lights. The Xylorians stood perfectly still, their crystal bodies refracting the light into rainbow patterns. The Nethrons flickered in and out of phase, their forms becoming translucent without warning. Sarah approached the group and several of the aliens turned to study her. She could feel their surprise and in some cases disappointment. Humans were smaller than most galactic species. They had no natural armor, no special abilities, no obvious physical advantages. To alien eyes, they probably looked fragile. "Welcome, recruits," a voice boomed across the training bay. The instructor was a Catherian, but different from the registration officer. This one was clearly military, with scars across the blue skin and cybernetic enhancements where flesh had been replaced by machinery. "I am Drill Instructor Vextai. For the next 6 standard months, I will determine whether any of you have what it takes to serve in the Empire's military forces." Vextai began walking among the recruits, studying each one with experienced eyes. "You come from different worlds, different cultures, different evolutionary paths. But here, you are all equally worthless until you prove otherwise." The instructor stopped in front of Sarah. "Ah, our human recruit. I've heard interesting things about your species. Tell me, soldier, what makes you think you can compete with beings who have natural advantages you lack?" Sarah met the alien's gaze steadily. "Respectfully, drill instructor, I don't think I can compete with them." Several of the alien recruits made sounds that might have been laughter. Vextai's scarred face showed surprise. "I know I can outfight them," Sarah continued quietly. The laughter stopped. Vextai stared at her for a long moment, then moved on to the next recruit. But Sarah noticed the instructor's hand moving to the data pad at their belt, no doubt making notes about the overconfident human. "Your first evaluation begins now," Vextai announced. "Combat simulation. Each of you will face a standard enemy patrol scenario. You have whatever equipment you can carry from the weapons locker, and 10 minutes to complete the objective." Sarah smiled for the first time since arriving at the station. Finally, something familiar. The other recruits might have natural advantages, but they had never fought in the mud of Afghanistan or the ruins of New Singapore. They had never learned that sometimes the difference between victory and death was simply being willing to do whatever it took to win. The Galactic Empire was about to discover what humans called total war. The weapons locker contained an impressive array of galactic military hardware. Energy rifles that could punch through starship hull plating, plasma grenades with yields that could level city blocks, and personal shields that could deflect most known weapons. The other recruits moved quickly, selecting the most powerful items they could carry. Sarah walked past the flashy equipment and picked up what the Empire classified as basic gear. A standard-issue energy rifle, a sidearm, 3 fragmentation grenades, a combat knife, and a basic tactical vest. The other recruit stared as she passed up weapons that could have given her significant advantages. "The human is making a mistake," one of the Velcors rumbled to his companion. "Those energy cannons would be more suitable for someone of her size." "Perhaps she doesn't understand the equipment," replied a Xylorian, their crystalline voice chiming like wind bells. "Her species is new to galactic technology." Sarah checked her rifle's power cell and sighted down the barrel. The weapon felt lighter than the firearms she was used to, but the balance was similar enough. She had learned long ago that the best weapon was the one you knew how to use properly. Drill instructor Vextai gestured toward a series of doors leading to individual simulation chambers. "Each scenario is randomized but equivalent in difficulty. You will face a patrol of enemy soldiers in an urban environment. Your objective is to eliminate all hostiles and secure the target building. Time limit is 10 minutes. Failure results in immediate dismissal from the program." The first recruit, a massive Velcor named Thorgrim, entered his chamber with confidence. Through the observation window, Sarah watched him charge directly at the enemy patrol with an energy cannon in each hand. His natural armor absorbed most of their return fire while he systematically destroyed everything in sight. The simulation ended in 4 minutes with complete success, though the target building was mostly rubble. "Typical Velcor approach," Vextai noted, making marks on their data pad. "Effective but crude." "Next." One of the Xylorians went next. Their approach was the opposite of Thorgrim's, the crystalline being spent the first 3 minutes analyzing enemy positions and calculating optimal firing angles. When they finally moved, every shot was perfectly placed. The simulation ended in 6 minutes with surgical precision, the target building completely intact. Excellent tactical analysis, Vextai commented, though the extended planning phase could be problematic in dynamic combat situations. Each recruit demonstrated their species' natural advantages. The Nethrans used their phasing abilities to move through walls and attack from unexpected angles. The Korthak coordinated their assault with mathematical precision. The alien Sarah didn't recognize showed impressive speed and coordination. Then it was her turn. Sarah entered the simulation chamber and immediately felt the familiar weight of combat gear settling around her. The environment materialized into a war-torn city street, complete with abandoned vehicles, rubble-filled storefronts, and the distant sound of artillery. It reminded her strongly of Mumbai during the resource wars. The enemy patrol consisted of 6 hostiles positioned around a 3-story building. Standard doctrine would suggest either the Velcor approach of overwhelming firepower or the Xylorian method of careful analysis and precision strikes. Sarah had learned different lessons during her years of warfare. She dropped prone behind a destroyed transport vehicle and began moving. The first hostile never saw her coming. Sarah had circled wide through the ruins of an adjacent building, using rubble and debris for concealment. Her knife found the gap between the enemy's armor plates before he could raise an alarm. 1 down, 5 to go. The second hostile was watching the main approach to the building, exactly where the other recruits had focused their attacks. Sarah approached from directly behind, using a technique she had learned from urban warfare specialists in the ruins of Berlin. The energy rifle's butt struck precisely at the base of the alien's skull. 2 down. Through the observation window, drill instructor Vextai leaned forward with interest. The other recruits who had completed their simulations gathered to watch. "What is the human doing?" asked the Korthak. "She's not using her weapons efficiently." "She's not using her weapons at all," observed one of the Xylorians. "Most unusual." Sarah was inside the target building now, moving with practiced silence through corridors that reminded her of a dozen different urban battlefields. The remaining 4 hostiles were positioned to cover the main entrances and windows. They were expecting an assault from outside. They weren't expecting someone who had already been inside for 3 minutes. Sarah had learned patience during the siege of Damascus. She had learned stealth in the underground tunnels of Tokyo. She had learned violence in more places than she cared to remember. But most importantly, she had learned that the best way to win a fight was to make sure your enemy never realized they were in one until it was too late. The third hostile was guarding a stairwell, his attention focused downward toward the building's main entrance. Sarah descended from the floor above, moving like smoke through shadows that shouldn't have provided concealment. Her knife struck again. 3 down. The fourth hostile heard something and turned just as Sarah rolled behind a piece of furniture. She waited, counting heartbeats until he decided it was his imagination and turned back to his post. The energy rifle's beam took him cleanly. 4 down. 2 hostiles remained, both positioned on the building's top floor where they could coordinate defensive fires against any assault. They were communicating in short bursts, professional soldiers maintaining proper tactical discipline. Sarah reached the top floor and evaluated her options. The 2 remaining enemies were positioned to cover each other. Standard buddy system tactics. Taking one would alert the other, leading to a firefight that would waste time and ammunition. Instead, she pulled the pins on 2 grenades and counted to 3 before rolling them around opposite corners. The explosions came simultaneously, and the simulation ended with a soft chime indicating mission success. Total time, 4 minutes, 37 seconds. The observation area was completely silent as Sarah exited the simulation chamber. She had completed the objective faster than the powerhouse Velcors, more efficiently than the analytical Xylorians, and with a level of tactical sophistication that impressed even the Korthak. "Explain your methodology," drill instructor Vextai said without preamble. "Standard infiltration and elimination," Sarah replied. "The objective was to secure the building, not to win a fair fight. I avoided direct confrontation where possible, and struck from positions of advantage when elimination was necessary. You used your knife for most kills, instead of your rifle. Energy. Discharge signatures would have revealed my position. Blade work is silent. The grenades at the end seemed excessive." Sarah shrugged. 2 targets, 2 grenades. Eliminated the possibility of return fire or coordinated response. Vextai made extensive notes on their datapad. Around the observation area, the other recruits were discussing what they had witnessed in hushed tones. The human fights like a Nethran, one of them observed, but without phasing abilities. No, corrected the Korthak. Nethrans avoid confrontation. This human eliminated 6 hostiles in less than 5 minutes. She fights like something new. Sarah noticed that several of the recruits were looking at her differently now, not with the dismissive curiosity from before, but with something approaching wariness. She had demonstrated that humans might not have natural armor or special abilities, but they brought something else to the battlefield. They brought the accumulated knowledge of a species that had spent its entire evolutionary history perfecting the art of killing. Adequate performance, drill instructor Vextai announced. All recruits will report for physical conditioning at 0600 tomorrow. Combat tactics review at 0800. Weapons maintenance at 1000. Dismissed. As the other recruits filed out of the training bay, Sarah noticed that none of them approached her. They maintained respectful distances and avoided direct eye contact. During her years of military service, she had seen that reaction before. It was the way soldiers looked at veterans who had seen too much combat. She wondered what they would think when they learned the truth about her background. The simulation had been child's play compared to the conflicts that had shaped her. Earth's Third World War had produced warriors who fought with a cyanide desperation and brutality that peaceful galactic civilizations couldn't comprehend. Sarah checked her equipment one final time before leaving the training bay. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and she suspected the Empire was beginning to realize that recruiting humans might be more significant than they had anticipated. In the quiet corridors of the recruitment station, word was already spreading about the human who fought like darkness itself had taken physical form. The mess hall buzzed with quiet conversation as Sarah entered for the evening meal. The facility served food designed to meet the nutritional needs of dozens of different species, with specialized sections for beings that consumed energy, metal, or substances that would be toxic to most life forms. The human section offered a selection of foods that approximated Earth cuisine, though everything tasted slightly artificial. Sarah chose a simple meal and looked for a place to sit. The mess hall was arranged in clusters that allowed different species to socialize comfortably. She noticed that conversations quieted as she passed various tables, and several pairs of alien eyes followed her movement. She found an empty table near the observation windows and settled down to eat. The view showed the training complex sprawling across the surface of Kythera Prime, with transport shuttles moving constantly between different facilities. It was an impressive operation, designed to process thousands of recruits from across the Empire's territory. "May I join you?" Sarah looked up to see the Korthak from her training group standing beside her table. The alien was roughly human-sized, but covered in interlocking scales that shifted color from dark green to silver, depending on the angle of light. Their species was known throughout the galaxy for tactical genius and strategic thinking. "Of course," Sarah said, gesturing to a chair. The Korthak settled into the seat with precise movements. "I am Zekthar of the 3rd Strategic House. I wanted to discuss your performance in today's simulation." "What about it?" "Your approach was unlike anything in our tactical databases. I have studied the military doctrines of 47 different species, and none employ the methodologies you demonstrated." Sarah took a bite of what the menu claimed was synthetic beef. "Every species develops tactics based on their strengths and environment. Humans had to get creative." "Creative is an interesting term for what I observed," Zekthar said. "You eliminated 6 trained soldiers using minimal resources and no technological advantages. Your movement suggested extensive combat experience, yet your species was only contacted 18 months ago. Earth had its own conflicts before you arrived." "How extensive?" Sarah paused, considering how much to reveal. The Empire knew that humans had been fighting each other when first contact occurred, but they didn't understand the scale or intensity of those conflicts. "Extensive enough." Zekathar's scales shifted to a more silver tone, which Sarah had learned indicated increased interest. "I would like to study human tactical doctrines. Would you be willing to share information about your species' military history?" Before Sarah could answer, 2 Velkhors approached their table. Thorgrim, who had performed well in the simulation, and his companion Grimjaw. The massive aliens looked down at them with expressions that might have been friendly on creatures less intimidating. "Human warrior," Thorgrim rumbled. "You fight with honor but strange methods. Velkhors respect strength, and you showed strength today." "Thank you," Sarah said. But we are curious, Grimjaw added. Your body seems fragile compared to ours. How do you train for combat without natural armor? Sarah smiled. And something in her expression made both Velcors take a small step backward. We train by fighting things that want to kill us. When you don't have natural armor, you learn not to get hit. And if you do get hit, Thorgrim asked, then you learn to keep fighting anyway. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of drill instructor Vextai. The scarred Catherian moved through the mess hall with purpose, their cybernetic enhancements glinting under the artificial lighting. Other recruits throughout the facility stopped eating to watch as the instructor approached Sarah's table. Chen, Vextai said without preamble, report to Administration Bay 7 immediately. Sarah stood, aware that every alien in the mess hall was now watching the exchange. Is there a problem, drill instructor? That remains to be determined. Move. Sarah followed Vextai through corridors she hadn't seen before, past administrative offices and secure communication centers. They eventually arrived at a conference room where several high-ranking Empire officials were waiting. The aliens wore uniforms that indicated senior military positions, and their expressions ranged from curious to concerned. Sit, Vextai ordered, gesturing to a chair facing the panel of officers. Sarah took the seat and waited. She had been through enough military debriefings to recognize the setup. Something about her performance had triggered additional scrutiny. Recruit Chen, the center official began. The alien was another Catherian, but one whose purple eyes held the weight of considerable authority. I am General Caxeth, commander of this training facility. We need to discuss your background. What specifically would you like to know, General? Your species' military records are incomplete. Earth's government provided basic information about your recent conflicts, but the details are vague. Today's simulation suggests you have significant combat experience. Sarah nodded. I've seen some action. How much action? Sarah considered her answer carefully. The Empire had requested human soldiers, but they had expectations based on their own relatively peaceful species. The truth might be more than they were prepared to handle. I served in the Earth Defense Corps for 12 years, she said finally. I participated in operations across 4 continents during the Resource Wars. Operations, General Caxeth repeated. Please be more specific. Urban warfare, counterinsurgency, deep reconnaissance, target elimination, hostage rescue, defensive actions, and offensive assaults. How many combat deployments? 47. The room fell silent. Several of the officials exchanged glances that suggested Sarah's answer was significantly higher than they had expected. 47 separate combat deployments? Another officer asked. That's correct. Over 12 years of service? Actually, over 8 years. The first 4 years were training and non-combat assignments. General Caxeth leaned forward. Recruit Chen, are you saying you averaged 6 combat deployments per year for 8 consecutive years? During the heavy fighting, yes. Sometimes more. The silence stretched longer this time. Sarah realized that what seemed normal to her was probably shocking to beings from a civilization that had enjoyed centuries of relative peace. The Empire had conflicts, but they were usually resolved through diplomatic means or limited military actions. How many enemy combatants have you personally eliminated? The question came from an official Sarah hadn't heard speak before. Sarah hesitated. This was the question she had been hoping to avoid, at least until the Empire better understood what humanity brought to their alliance. General, with respect, is that information relevant to my training evaluation? Answer the question, recruit. Sarah looked around the room at the alien faces studying her with intense interest. These beings had no frame of reference for understanding what Earth's wars had been like. They came from species that evolved on worlds with abundant resources, where conflicts were rare and usually brief. Humans had evolved on a world where everything worth having was scarce, and survival required constant competition. They had spent thousands of years perfecting warfare, and the resource wars had been the culmination of all that accumulated knowledge. I stopped counting at 300, Sarah said quietly. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Several officials began speaking rapidly in their native languages, while others frantically made notes on datapads. General Caxeth raised a hand for silence. Recruit Chen, are you claiming to have personally killed over 300 enemy soldiers? I'm claiming that I stopped counting at 300. That was 6 years ago. And you've continued combat operations since then? Until the ceasefire, yes. General Caxith stood and began pacing behind the table. Recruit Chen, in the entire recorded military history of the Catherian Empire, our most decorated soldier has 17 confirmed eliminations over a career spanning 30 years. Sarah nodded. Different wars, different circumstances. Indeed, the general said. This information changes our assessment of human military capabilities significantly. We may need to reconsider the role we intended for your species in our defense forces. What role did you have in mind? Sarah asked. Support positions, logistics, technical maintenance, perhaps some light security duties. We assumed humans would need extensive development before being suitable for frontline combat roles. Sarah almost smiled. General, I think you may have underestimated what humans consider normal preparation for military service. The meeting continued for another hour, with Sarah answering increasingly detailed questions about human military doctrine, training methods, and combat experience. By the end, the Empire officials looked like beings who had discovered that their new allies were not quite what they had expected. As Sarah finally left the conference room, she wondered how the Empire would react when they learned that she wasn't even considered exceptional by human military standards. She was just a standard infantry veteran. The real Special Forces operators were still on Earth, waiting to see if the galaxy was ready for them. Program. Sarah arrived at Bay 15 to find that half of the standard equipment had been replaced with advanced military hardware she hadn't seen before, weapons that required specialized clearances, armor systems reserved for elite units, and combat simulators marked with warning labels in multiple galactic languages. Drill. Instructor Vextai stood before the assembled recruits with an expression that suggested the training curriculum had been significantly modified overnight. New orders from High Command, Vextai announced. This training group has been redesignated as an accelerated program. You will now be evaluated for immediate deployment to active conflict zones. The alien recruits exchanged nervous glances. Accelerated programs were usually reserved for experienced soldiers being retrained for specialized roles, not raw recruits straight from civilian life. Additionally, Vextai continued, we have been joined by an observer from the Strategic Assessment Division. The instructor gestured toward a new alien Sarah hadn't seen before. Senior Analyst Morthak will be evaluating our training methods and recruit capabilities. The newcomer was unlike any species Sarah had encountered. Morthak stood nearly 3 meters tall but was so thin they appeared almost skeletal. Their skin was translucent, revealing complex internal structures that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. When they spoke, their voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in multiple dimensions. Greetings, recruits, Morthak said. My species serves as the Empire's primary intelligence analysts. We observe, we calculate, we predict outcomes. I am here because recent developments have suggested that our predictions regarding human military capabilities may require significant revision. Sarah felt the weight of alien attention focusing on her. Word had clearly spread beyond the administrative offices about the previous evening's revelations. Today's exercise will be different, Vextai announced. You will face a live-fire training scenario designed for veteran soldiers. The enemy forces will be actual combat drones programmed with advanced tactical algorithms. Injury is possible. Death is unlikely but not impossible. Several of the recruits made sounds of alarm. This was far beyond standard training protocols. Chen, Vextai called, you will participate in the exercise solo first. The others will observe and then attempt to replicate your performance. Sarah nodded. What are the parameters? Secure and hold a forward observation post against incoming enemy forces. You have 30 minutes to establish defensive positions before the attack begins. You have access to any equipment in the advanced armory. Sarah walked to the equipment locker and began her selection process. The advanced weapons were impressive, but she chose familiar tools over exotic technology. A reliable assault rifle with extended magazines, a sidearm, defensive grenades, shaped charges, and basic body armor. She also selected items the other recruits had ignored: wire, small tools, and what appeared to be construction materials. Interesting choices, Senior Analyst Morthak observed, their bioluminescent patterns shifting to what might have been curiosity. Most soldiers would select the heavy weapons and powered armor. Heavy weapons attract attention, Sarah replied, and powered armor makes noise. The observation post was a concrete structure, positioned on high ground overlooking a valley approach. It offered good sight lines but limited cover from multiple directions. Sarah spent her 30 minutes of preparation time in ways that would have seemed strange to the watching aliens. Instead of focusing on the building itself, she moved through the surrounding area. She identified natural choke points, cleared fields of fire, and began placing surprises along likely approach routes. The wire became trip lines connected to grenades. The shaped charges became improvised mines positioned at tactical locations. The construction materials became obstacles that would funnel enemy movement into predetermined kill zones. When the exercise began, the combat drones approached with textbook precision. They moved in coordinated units, used proper cover and concealment, and employed suppressing fire to advance their positions. Against most opponents, their tactics would have been devastatingly effective. Sarah had learned to fight in wars where textbook tactics got you killed. The first drone unit triggered her perimeter defenses while they were still 200 meters from the observation post. Explosions erupted along their approach route, disorienting their formation and destroying 3 of the 12 attacking units. The remaining drones adapted quickly, spreading out and using alternate routes. Sarah let them come closer, tracking their movements from positions she had prepared outside the observation post itself. When they reached the secondary defensive line, she triggered the shaped charges. 4 more drones eliminated. The surviving units finally reached the observation post and began their assault on the building. They used proper urban warfare tactics, coordinating their attacks and providing mutual support. They breached the walls with explosive charges and entered through multiple access points. Simultaneously, they found an empty building filled with more surprises. Sarah had learned long ago that the best defensive position was behind your enemy, not in front of them. While the drones focused on the observation post, she moved through positions she had prepared in the surrounding terrain. Her rifle spoke with precision, each shot eliminating a target before moving to the next firing position. The exercise ended with 12 destroyed combat drones and 1 human who had never been in serious danger. Time to completion: 14 minutes 37 seconds, Vextai announced. 0 friendly casualties. 0 structural damage to the primary objective. In the observation area, the alien recruits stared in stunned silence. Several were making rapid notes while others simply watched with expressions of disbelief. "How?" asked Zekthar, the Korthak tactical specialist. "You abandoned the defensive position entirely. That violates every principle of positional warfare." "Positional warfare assumes your enemy knows where your position is," Sarah replied. "I gave them a position to attack while I attacked them from positions they didn't know about. But the observation post was the objective you were supposed to defend," protested one of the Xylorians. "The objective was to secure and hold the observation post. It's secure and I'm holding it. The drones are scrap metal." Senior Analyst Morthak moved closer, their bioluminescent patterns cycling through rapid changes that suggested intense mental activity. "Human Chen, your tactics suggest a level of battlefield innovation that our models did not predict. You treated the entire engagement as a deception operation rather than a defensive action." "I treated it like combat," Sarah said. "The enemy expected me to defend a position, so I used that expectation against them. This is how humans typically approach warfare." Sarah paused. How could she explain that what she had just demonstrated was considered basic infantry tactics by human standards? That any soldier who had survived more than a few engagements would have employed similar methods? "This is how humans approach survival," she said finally. The other recruits began their attempts at the exercise. Each alien species employed their natural advantages and racial doctrines. The Velkors used brute force and heavy weapons. The Xylorians employed mathematical precision and optimal firing solutions. The Nethrans used their phasing abilities for mobility and surprise attacks. All of them tried to defend the observation post directly. All of them took casualties. Most of them failed to eliminate all the attacking drones before the time limit expired. "Inadequate performance across the board," Vextai announced after the last recruit completed their attempt. With the exception of Chen, all participants demonstrated fundamental misunderstanding of adaptive combat tactics. Senior Analyst Morthak approached Sarah as the other recruits filed out of the training area. "I must ask you additional questions about human military capabilities. What would you like to know?" Are your demonstrated abilities typical for human soldiers? Sarah considered the question carefully. I'm experienced, but not exceptional. Most humans who survive active combat develop similar skills. How many humans like you currently exist? On Earth? Several million, probably. The senior analyst's bioluminescent patterns went completely dark for several seconds. When they resumed, the lights pulsed in what Sarah was beginning to recognize as extreme agitation. Several million? Morthak repeated. That's veterans of recent conflicts only. If you include reserve forces and militia with less recent experience, the number would be significantly higher. How significantly higher? Maybe 50 million. It depends on how you define combat ready. Morthak was quiet for a long time, their patterns shifting through sequences Sarah hadn't seen before. Finally, they spoke. Human Chen, I believe my government may have made a significant miscalculation regarding the nature of our new alliance with your species. How so? We invited warriors into our empire. We thought we were recruiting soldiers. Sarah waited for the alien to continue. There is a difference, Morthak said quietly, and I suspect we are about to learn what that difference means. As Sarah left the training facility that evening, she noticed increased security around the complex. More guards, additional checkpoints, and what appeared to be senior officers conducting urgent conferences in administrative areas. The Empire was beginning to understand that they're new human allies. The emergency klaxons started blaring at hours, their harsh mechanical wails echoing through every corridor of the training complex. Sarah woke instantly, years of military service having programmed automatic responses to alarm signals. Around her, other recruits stumbled from their bunks in confusion, unused to the sudden transition from sleep to potential combat readiness. All personnel report to designated emergency stations immediately, announced a voice over the facility's communication system. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Sarah dressed quickly and moved toward the assembly area, noting the increased activity throughout the complex. Catharian military personnel were running between stations with urgent purpose, and she could see senior officers gathering in what appeared to be crisis conferences. Training Group 7 assembled in Bay 15, along with several other recruit groups. Drill instructor Vextai appeared, but instead of their usual composed demeanor, the alien showed visible signs of stress. Listen carefully, Vextai announced. 3 hours ago, the Empire monitoring station in the Xeris system went silent. Reconnaissance drones sent to investigate discovered evidence of an attack by unknown forces. Murmurs rippled through the assembled recruits. The Xeris system was a critical early warning outpost, positioned to detect potential threats from the Galactic Rim, where several hostile civilizations maintained uneasy truces with the Empire. All available forces are being mobilized for investigation and potential retaliation, Vextai continued. However, the attack appears to have employed tactics and weapon systems that our standard forces are not prepared to counter. Sarah felt a familiar tension building in her chest. She had been through enough pre-mission briefings to recognize the pattern. Something had gone wrong, badly wrong, and conventional responses weren't working. The command staff has requested that Training Group 7 be deployed immediately to assist with reconnaissance and assessment, Vextai said. This will be an active combat mission, not a training exercise. The alien recruits looked shocked. They had expected months of additional training before facing real combat situations. Sarah noticed that several of them were glancing in her direction, perhaps remembering her performance in recent exercises. Senior Analyst Morthak appeared beside Vextai, their bioluminescent patterns cycling rapidly through configurations that suggested extreme urgency. The situation has developed beyond our initial assessment, Morthak announced. The attacking force appears to have used human-style tactics. Sarah felt every alien eye in the assembly area focus on her. What kind of tactics? She asked. Unconventional warfare. The Xeris station was designed to withstand direct assault by the most advanced weapons in our tactical databases. Instead, the attackers used infiltration, sabotage, and what appears to be psychological warfare to neutralize the defenses without triggering major alarms. That doesn't sound like any of the known hostile species, observed Zekthar. It's not, Morthak replied. Intelligence analysis suggests we're dealing with a previously unknown enemy that has observed human combat techniques and adapted them for their own use. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the facility's environmental systems. How could they have observed human combat techniques? We've only been in space for 18 months. That's what we need to find out, Morthak said. The attack patterns suggest extensive knowledge of human military doctrine, but modified for use by non-human physiology and technology. General Caxith appeared, moving with the purposeful stride of a commander dealing with a crisis. Recruits, you are being deployed immediately aboard the cruiser Inevitable Victory. Your mission is to investigate the Xeris incident and assess the capabilities of this new threat. General, Sarah said, if someone has been studying human tactics, they'll be expecting responses based on Empire doctrine. Standard approaches might not be effective. Which is why you're being deployed, the general replied. You understand human warfare from the inside. If this enemy has learned to fight like humans, we need someone who can think like a human to counter them. Within the hour, Training Group 7 was aboard a Catherian cruiser, accelerating toward the Xeris system. The ship was impressive by galactic standards, armed with energy weapons that could devastate planetary surfaces and defended by shields that could withstand direct hits from capital ship weapons. Sarah studied the tactical displays showing the ship's capabilities and armament. Everything was designed for conventional space warfare between organized military forces. It was powerful but predictable, following established patterns that any competent intelligence service could analyze and counter. The voyage will take 18 hours, announced Captain Vorthek, the ship's commander. Use the time to prepare for whatever we might encounter. Sarah spent the journey reviewing what little information was available about the Xeris attack. The monitoring station had been a fortress designed to detect and repel any known threat. It should have been able to hold out for days against conventional assault, giving time for reinforcements to arrive. Instead, it had gone silent in less than 2 hours. The attack had begun with what appeared to be a standard probe of the station's defenses. Long-range sensors showed a small force of unidentified ships approaching the system. The station's garrison had prepared for conventional space combat, deploying defensive formations and charging their primary weapons. Then the unknown attackers had done something unprecedented. Instead of engaging the station's defenses directly, they had somehow infiltrated the facility itself. Internal security cameras showed glimpses of figures moving through corridors, but the images were distorted and unclear. What was clear was the result. Critical systems throughout the station had been sabotaged simultaneously. Power systems failed, communication arrays went offline, and defensive weapons were disabled from within. The garrison had been neutralized without the attackers exposing themselves to return fire. It's like they knew exactly where to hit, observed Zekthar, reviewing the same data. The sabotage points were perfectly chosen to create cascading system failures. It's more than that, Sarah said. Look at the timing. Everything was hit within a 15-minute window. That means they had teams positioned throughout the facility before the attack began. How is that possible? The station had multiple security checkpoints and scanner arrays. Sarah studied the station's layout, comparing it to military installations she had seen on Earth. It's possible if they understood the security systems well enough to bypass them, or if they had help from inside. You think there were collaborators? I think someone taught them how to think like human special forces, Sarah said. This wasn't improvised. They had detailed intelligence, specific objectives, and the skills to execute a complex operation under time pressure. The other recruits gathered around the tactical display as Sarah pointed out details they had missed. See these sabotage points? They're not random. Each one was chosen to create specific effects that would support the next phase of the operation. Disable communications first so the garrison can't call for help. Then eliminate defensive systems so they can't fight back effectively. Finally, disrupt life support and power to force surrender or evacuation. This is standard human military doctrine? Asked one of the Velcors. This is basic special operations planning, Sarah replied. Any human infiltration team would follow similar patterns. As the cruiser approached the Xeris system, long-range sensors began providing more detailed information about the aftermath of the attack. The monitoring station was still intact but completely non-responsive. No life signs, no power signatures, no communications. It's like a ghost ship, Captain Vorthek observed. Physically undamaged but completely dead. Captain, Sarah said, I recommend extreme caution in our approach. If they could do this to a fortified installation, they're capable of setting traps for anyone who comes to investigate. What kind of traps? Sarah considered the question. If I were planning this operation, I would leave the station intact specifically to lure rescue forces into a kill zone. The attackers are probably still in the system waiting to see how we respond. As if summoned by her words, the ship's tactical officer announced incoming contacts, multiple ships emerging from the asteroid field. Configuration unknown, but their approach vectors suggest hostile intent. Red alert, Captain Vorthek ordered. Prepare for combat. Sarah watched the tactical display as the unknown ships moved into attack formation. Their approach was unlike anything in the Empire's tactical databases. Instead of the organized battle lines that characterized galactic warfare, the attackers moved in loose formations that maximized their flexibility while minimizing their vulnerability to return fire. They're using hit-and-run tactics, Sarah observed. They're not trying to win a direct engagement. They want to damage us and then withdraw before we can effectively respond. How do we counter such tactics? Captain Vorthek asked. Sarah studied the enemy formation and felt a familiar calm settling over her. She had faced similar situations before, against enemies who refused to fight by conventional rules. We stop trying to fight their kind of battle, she said, and we start fighting ours. The first enemy weapons fire struck the cruiser's shields, testing their strength and defensive patterns. The bridge of the inevitable victory erupted in controlled chaos as enemy fire pounded against the ship's defensive shields. Captain Vorthek barked orders to the crew, while tactical displays showed the unknown attackers maintaining their unconventional formation, shields down to 70%, reported the defensive systems officer. They're targeting specific grid sections trying to create weak points. Return fire full spread, Captain Vorthek ordered. Target their lead vessels. Sarah watched the exchange from her position near the tactical station and felt growing concern. The Empire's response was textbook space combat doctrine, but the enemy was refusing to engage according to those same rules. Captain, she said, permission to speak freely. Granted, your tactics aren't working. They're staying mobile and hitting you from angles your weapons can't effectively cover. Meanwhile, they're learning your defensive patterns with each attack. What do you suggest? Sarah studied the tactical display, noting the enemy ship's movement patterns and attack priorities. They're fighting like human raiders, but they're still using alien technology and thinking. That gives us an advantage if we exploit it correctly. Explain. Human raiders would be more unpredictable. These attackers are following patterns that suggest they learned human tactics from observation, rather than experience. They're sophisticated, but they're also predictable once you understand their methodology. Enemy fire struck the ship again, this time causing visible damage to one of the secondary weapon systems. The attackers were getting more accurate as they learned the cruiser's defensive capabilities. Shields down to 55%, the defensive officer reported. They're coordinating their fire to overwhelm specific sections. Captain Vorthek turned to Sarah with an expression that showed desperation overriding military protocol. Recruit Chen, if you have a tactical recommendation, I need to hear it now. Sarah moved to the primary tactical station and began entering commands. First, we need to change our defensive posture. Instead of trying to maintain shield coverage against their attacks, we're going to let them think they're succeeding. Let them damage the ship. Let them think they're damaging the ship. We're going to simulate system failures while actually repositioning our real defensive systems. When they move in for what they think is a killing blow, we'll be ready. That's extremely risky. It's asymmetric warfare, Sarah replied. When your enemy has studied your conventional tactics, you win by doing things they haven't seen before. Captain Vorthek hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Do it. Sarah began issuing orders to the crew, coordinating actions that went against everything in the Empire's tactical manuals. Instead of maintaining steady defensive patterns, she had them simulate random system failures. Instead of returning fire at maximum rate, she ordered sporadic responses that suggested the ship was struggling to maintain combat effectiveness. They're taking the bait, reported the sensor operator. Enemy formation is tightening, moving in for close assault. Perfect, Sarah said. Tactical officer, prepare firing solution Alpha 7. Navigation. Ready for emergency acceleration on my mark. The enemy ships closed to what they apparently considered optimal range for their final attack. Sarah watched their formation carefully, waiting for the precise moment when their confidence would become a vulnerability. Now, she ordered. The inevitable victory erupted with weapon fire from angles the attackers hadn't expected, systems that should have been damaged or destroyed, unleashed coordinated salvos that caught the enemy formation in a crossfire pattern. Simultaneously, the cruiser executed a high-acceleration maneuver that repositioned it outside the attackers' prepared firing solutions. 3 enemy vessels were destroyed in the opening seconds of the counterattack. The remaining ships scattered, their tight formation dissolving as they realized they had been deceived. "Pursue them," Sarah ordered. "Don't let them regroup." "Recruit Chen," Captain Vorthek said. "You're not authorized to issue tactical orders." "Captain, with respect, I'm the only person on this ship who understands how they think. If you want to survive the next 5 minutes, I need temporary command authority." The captain looked around his bridge at the tactical situation developing on the displays. The enemy ships were regrouping in a defensive formation, but their movement suggested confusion rather than confidence. "Granted," Vorthek said. "Temporary tactical command to recruit Chen." Sarah immediately began coordinating a pursuit that violated every principle of conventional space warfare. Instead of maintaining formation integrity, she had the inevitable victory split its attack patterns to create multiple threats simultaneously. Instead of focusing fire on the strongest enemy targets, she ordered strikes designed to create maximum confusion and disarray. "Target their communication arrays first," she instructed the weapons officer. "Make it impossible for them to coordinate responses." But their main weapons are still operational. Their main weapons aren't the threat. Their coordination is what makes them dangerous. Take away their ability to work together, and they become individual targets instead of a unified force. The battle that followed was unlike anything the Empire's forces had ever experienced. Sarah treated space combat like an extension of ground warfare, using deception, misdirection, and psychological pressure to break the enemy's cohesion before destroying them piecemeal. When enemy ships tried to withdraw, she anticipated their escape routes and positioned the cruiser to intercept them. When they attempted to regroup, she struck at their communication nodes to prevent coordination. When they finally tried to surrender, she ignored the signals and continued the attack. "They're attempting to surrender," Captain Vorthek observed. "No, they're not," Sarah replied. "They're trying to buy time to escape or regroup. Human raiders would do the same thing." "How can you be certain?" "Because if they really wanted to surrender, they would have transmitted on open frequencies where their entire force could hear it. This is directed communication only to us, which means it's a deception." As if to prove her point, the apparently surrendering enemy ship suddenly accelerated toward the inevitable victory, while charging its weapons for a ramming attack. "Evasive maneuvers," Sarah ordered. "Destroy that ship immediately." The ramming attack failed, and the final enemy vessel was eliminated moments later. The battle was over, but Sarah's expression remained grim. "Captain, we need to investigate that monitoring station immediately," she said. "This was just the outer picket. The real threat is still out there." The boarding party that investigated the Xeris monitoring station found exactly what Sarah had predicted. The facility had been captured intact and turned into a trap for rescue forces. Hidden throughout the station were sophisticated recording devices that had been documenting Empire response protocols and tactical doctrines, but more disturbing were the bodies they found in the station's lower levels. Not the Catherian garrison, but the remains of creatures unlike any known species. They appeared to be artificially modified, enhanced with technology that allowed them to interface directly with alien computer systems. "Cybernetic organisms," Senior Analyst Morthak observed, studying the remains. "But the base biology is unfamiliar." Sarah examined one of the bodies more closely and felt a chill of recognition. "I've seen something like this before during the Singapore campaign. Biowarfare research projects that went wrong." "You think these are artificial soldiers?" "I think someone has been creating military forces specifically designed to counter galactic defense systems," Sarah said. "And they've been studying human tactics to make them more effective." As the investigation continued, the scope of the threat became clear. The attackers weren't just another hostile species. They were an artificially created military force that combined alien technology with human tactical innovation and cybernetic enhancement. "This changes everything," Captain Vorthek said as they reviewed the findings. "An enemy force that can adapt and learn our tactics in real time." "It gets worse," Sarah said. "If they've been observing human military doctrine, they know about our capabilities. But they don't know about our limitations. What do you mean? They think every human fights like I do. They're preparing to face an entire species of soldiers with my level of training and experience. Captain Vortex stared at her. Are you saying they're overestimating human capabilities? I'm saying they're about to discover that humans don't just fight wars, Sarah replied. We perfect them. The return journey to Kithra Prime was tense, with everyone aboard the inevitable Victory, aware that they had encountered something unprecedented. The enemy force had been defeated, but the broader threat they represented was just beginning to become clear. As Sarah filed her tactical report, she included a recommendation that would fundamentally change the Empire's relationship with humanity. It was time for the galaxy to meet the real human military. 3 weeks after the Battle of Xeris, Sarah stood in the Empire's highest military command center on Kithra Prime. The massive facility buzzed with activity as officers from dozens of species coordinated responses to threats that had seemed impossible just months earlier. The discovery of the artificial soldiers had triggered a galaxy-wide security alert. Similar attacks had been reported across 17 different systems, all following patterns that combined alien technology with human tactical principles. The Empire's conventional forces were struggling to adapt to an enemy that refused to fight by established rules. The situation continues to deteriorate, reported General Caxith to the assembled command staff. Our forces in the Outer Rim are reporting 60% casualty rates against these unknown attackers. Standard defensive protocols are proving inadequate. Sarah listened from her position at the Tactical Analysis Station, still technically a recruit, but now serving as the Empire's primary advisor on human military doctrine. The past weeks had been a crash course in galactic politics and military organization for her, while simultaneously serving as an introduction to human warfare for the Empire's leadership. General, she said, permission to address the command staff? Granted. Sarah moved to the central display and activated a 3-dimensional tactical map showing the current conflict zones. The problem isn't that our enemies are using human tactics. The problem is that you're still trying to fight them using Empire doctrine. Murmurs rippled through the assembled officers. Many of them had decades of experience in conventional galactic warfare and weren't accustomed to having their methods questioned by a newly recruited alien. Explain, General Caxith said. Human military doctrine isn't just about tactics, Sarah said. It's about a completely different approach to warfare itself. When humans fight, we don't just try to defeat enemy forces. We try to make it impossible for them to continue fighting. She manipulated the display to show supply lines, communication networks, and command structures throughout the conflict zones. Your enemy has learned to hit military targets using human tactics, but they're still thinking like conventional galactic forces. They expect you to respond with military solutions. Instead, we need to target the infrastructure that makes their operations possible. You're suggesting we attack non-military targets? Asked Admiral HFY, the Empire's senior naval commander. I'm suggesting we attack the systems that allow them to coordinate their forces, Sarah replied. Military targets are defended. Logistics networks usually aren't. Senior analyst Morthak's bioluminescent patterns shifted to configurations Sarah had learned indicated intense calculation. You're proposing asymmetric warfare on a strategic level rather than tactical level. I'm proposing we fight a human war instead of trying to fight a civilized war, Sarah said. Your enemies adapted human tactics because they work, but they only work if you're willing to commit completely to the methodology. General Caxith studied the tactical displays with obvious concern. Recruit Chen, what you're suggesting would represent a fundamental change in how the Empire conducts military operations. Yes, it would. It would also require resources and capabilities that we don't currently possess. Sarah nodded. Which is why I've submitted a recommendation for immediate deployment of human military forces to support Empire operations. The command center fell silent. After the revelations about human military experience, the Empire's leadership had been carefully considering how to integrate human capabilities without destabilizing their existing power structures. How many human soldiers are you recommending? General Caxith asked. Initially, 50,000 special operations personnel and 200,000 regular military units. The silence deepened. Admiral HFY was the first to speak. Recruit Chen, The Empire's entire military consists of approximately 1 million active personnel across all branches and species. You're suggesting we add a human force representing 25% of our total strength. I'm suggesting you add a human force that could probably defeat your current military in open combat, Sarah said quietly. The enemy you're facing now is using corrupted human tactics with alien technology. Wait until you see what humans can do when we're using our own equipment and fighting for something we believe in. And what do humans believe in? Asked General Caxith. Sarah considered the question carefully. It was the crucial point that would determine whether the Empire truly understood what they were inviting into their civilization. Survival, she said finally. Humans believe that any threat to our continued existence justifies any response necessary to eliminate that threat. We don't fight wars to achieve political objectives. We fight wars to ensure that our children have a future. That sounds like a very dangerous philosophy, observed Morthak. It is, Sarah agreed. It's also why humans have survived everything our planet could throw at us for millions of years. Evolution taught us that the universe is hostile, resources are scarce, and the only guarantee of survival is the willingness to do whatever it takes to protect what matters to us. She gestured toward the tactical displays showing the ongoing conflicts. Your artificial enemies learned human tactics, but they didn't learn human motivation. They're fighting to achieve objectives. Humans fight to eliminate threats. There's a fundamental difference in commitment. General Caxith exchanged glances with the other senior officers. Sarah could see them weighing the potential benefits against the risks of fully integrating human military capabilities into their civilization. If we approve this deployment, the general said, what guarantees do we have that human forces won't eventually turn against the Empire? None, Sarah said. But you have my word that as long as the Empire treats humanity as valued allies rather than expendable assets, human forces will fight alongside you against any threat. And if we refuse this deployment? Sarah looked around the command center at the aliens who had become her colleagues and, in some cases, her friends. Then you'll continue fighting with conventional methods against an enemy that has learned to exploit those methods. And eventually you'll lose. The debate that followed lasted for hours. Empire officers raised concerns about command structures, resource allocation, and the potential cultural impact of large-scale human military presence. Human tactics were undeniably effective, but they represented a fundamental shift in how the Empire approached conflict resolution. Finally, General Caxith called for a vote among the senior command staff. The result was narrow but decisive. The Empire would formally request large-scale military support from Earth. Recruit Chen, the general said, you'll be promoted to the rank of commander and serve as liaison officer for human military integration. Your first assignment will be returning to Earth to coordinate the deployment. Sarah nodded. Thank you, General. I think you're making the right choice. I hope so, General Caxith replied. Because once we invite human military forces into our territory, there will be no going back. The Empire will never be the same. 3 months later, Sarah stood on the bridge of a human military transport as it approached Kythera Prime. Behind her, 50,000 of Earth's most experienced special operations personnel were preparing for deployment to a galaxy that had no idea what human warfare really looked like. The recruits she had trained with were now serving as junior officers in mixed human-alien units. The Empire's military doctrine was evolving rapidly as human tactical innovations spread throughout their forces. And the artificial enemies who had learned corrupted human tactics were discovering that real human military operations were far more sophisticated and ruthless than they had anticipated. Sarah's personal kill count had stopped being relevant. Weeks earlier, when human orbital strikes began, eliminating enemy infrastructure across multiple star systems simultaneously, the galaxy was learning that humans didn't just fight individual battles, they fought entire wars. Commander, reported the transport's captain, we're receiving clearance for final approach. The Empire fleet is forming up to escort us to the deployment zones. Sarah watched the alien warships taking positions around the human vessels and smiled. The Empire had invited warriors into their civilization, thinking they were recruiting soldiers. They had been wrong about that, but not in the way they feared. They hadn't recruited soldiers. They had recruited protectors. And now the galaxy would learn the difference between beings who fought for duty and beings who fought for survival. The artificial enemies had adapted human tactics, but they were about to face human strategy, human logistics, and human determination applied on a galactic scale. Sarah's kill count had stopped mattering because humans didn't fight wars to rack up individual victories. They fought wars to win.